Anne was given a diary on her 13th birthday. There was a party in the afternoon, and we saw that she had gotten a very beautiful diary from her parents. I don't know if it was the first or second one that she had, because I remember that Anne was always writing in her diary, shielding it with her hand, even at school during break. Everybody could see that she was writing. But no one was allowed to see what she had written. And I thought that she was writing entire books. I was always very curious to know what was in the diary, but she never showed it to anyone. I never could find out what was in it, but I have thought that there must have been much more than there was in the published diary. Maybe they never found all that she wrote before she went into hiding. She had already been writing for a couple of years. I remember that very well. She did write in the diary that if she had a choice after the war, she wanted to become a writer in the Netherlands. As I remember it, she was a bit spoiled, particularly by her father. Anne was her daddy's girl. Margot was more like her mother. It's a good thing there were only 2 children. Mrs. Frank was a little religious, and Margot went in that direction too. Margot always said that after the war, if she could choose, she wanted to be a nurse in Israel.
In those days I went immediately to the Red Cross to look at the list that showed who had survived and who had died. And I put a cross next to the names of those who I knew had actually died. I also put a cross next to the names of Anne and Margot. Much later, in the summer of 1945, a tall, thin, distinguished man stood on the sidewalk. He looked through our window, and Bob, my husband, opened the door because he often protected me. In the beginning, I had to deal so much with family members whom I had to tell that their sons and daughters and husbands would not be coming back. That was often unbearable. And it was especially difficult to deal with because I had survived and had come back. and there stood Otto Frank. He asked if I knew what had happened to his 2 daughters. I knew, but it was hard to get the words out of my mouth. He had already heard from the Red Cross, but he wanted to have it confirmed. I had to tell him that his children were no more. He took it very hard. He was a man who didn't show his feelings openly. He had tremendous self-control. He was a tall, thin, aristocratic man. Later, we saw him frequently. By a remarkable chance, Anne's manuscript, her diary, was found at Annie Roman's. And Annie Roman was in our circle of friends. That's really amazing. And later he came often. He always stayed at the Hotel Suisse on Kalverstraat, where my relatives from Brussels always stayed. I always found that so nice.
In Israel, where we live, Anne Frank is a legend. And at the same time, a living girl. People are very interested in her. I believe that there's an Anne Frank street in practically every town. Her diary has been translated into modern Hebrew. People think that she is very special. Once, when my daughter was in the Netherlands with her twin daughters, one of the first things they wanted me to show them was the Anne Frank house. I didn't feel up to it. Actually, I didn't want to go at all. For more than 40 years, I had pushed that aside because I really wanted to live normally and didn't want to talk about it anymore. Nonetheless, I went to the Anne Frank house, and I had a very special feeling there. I had seen her, after all, from the time she had came to Westerbrook. People took pictures there of every corner, every plank, everything. Especially the Japanese, who you would suppose wouldn't be as emotionally touched as the Europeans. My daughter panicked because she knew that I had known Anne. She looked around and said, "Mama, shouldn't you tell these people that you knew her? Shouldn't you do something? Tell them? Tell them?" I couldn't do it. I absolutely couldn't. I wouldn't have known how to tell it.
I especially remember the last time I saw the Frank family in Auschwitz. Another selection had taken place. I spoke to Mrs. Frank, who was with Margot. Anne was somewhere else. She had kvats. Scabies. She had a rash of some kind or other. The Germans, unhindered by medical knowledge, at least the Germans who had the say-so over our lives, were terribly afraid because it might be infectious, and she had to be isolated. As a result, Anne couldn't go with our group. Mrs. Frank, echoed by Margot, said, "We are, of course, going with her." I remember that I nodded, that I understood that. That was the last time that I saw them. Before that, we naturally saw each other regularly, and I talked with them. They were always together, mother and daughters. Whatever discord you might infer from the diary was swept away now by existential need. They were always together. It is certain that they gave each other a great deal of support. All the things that a teenager might think of her mother were no longer of any significance. What I mean is that there are people who talk about the war, whose bike was requisitioned, how terrible that was, and then they stop. For them, that was the very worst that happened. If you say, "Yes, but there are people who went into hiding, and much worse, there are also people in the camps." "Oh yes, that was too bad, but I had to give up my bike." I think it was that way with Anne. When she was in hiding, which is a very unhealthy situation, her mother was someone against whom she rebelled. But in the camp, all of that actually completely fell away. By giving each other mutual support, they were able to keep each other alive, although no one can fight typhus.